In a quiet town where the streets were lined with banyan trees and the breeze always carried a trace of dust and jasmine lived a young man named Nikhil. On the outside, his life seemed ordinary. School in the morning, chores in the afternoon, a part-time job at a local bookstore in the evening. But inside, there was a war happening that no one could see. Nikhil's mind was always loud, not with thoughts of ambition or creativity, but with doubt, with questions that had no answers. What if I fail? What if they laugh? What if I'm not enough? Every time he thought of trying something new, raising his hand in class, applying for a scholarship, even speaking up in a conversation, a voice in his head whispered, "Better not." And he listened. He watched others move ahead. Friends joined clubs, shared ideas, stepped into opportunities. Nikhil stayed in the shadows. He told himself he was shy, introverted, not meant for big things, but the truth was, he was stuck in a loop of silent battles. One evening after work, he sat at the back of the bookstore surrounded by stacks of unsorted novels. He pulled out a random book and flipped through the pages until one line caught his eye. Your mind can be your greatest ally, or your worst enemy. He froze, read the sentence again, then again. It hit him harder than he expected. For years, he had assumed the problem was outside. Circumstances, luck, talent. But what if it wasn't the world holding him back? What if it was his own mind? That night, Nikhil couldn't sleep. For the first time, he wasn't drowning in doubt, he was questioning it. The next morning, Nikhil sat at his desk before school, staring at his reflection in the dark screen of his laptop. That sentence from the book echoed in his head like a drumbeat. Your mind can be your greatest ally, or your worst enemy. He opened a blank document and typed those exact words at the top. Then, hesitating only slightly, he began to write underneath, "Today, I will not believe everything my mind tells me." It was a simple statement, but it felt like a rebellion. At school, things weren't magically different. He still felt nervous when the teacher asked questions. He still felt the old reflex to shrink, to stay silent. But now, there was a second voice inside him, quieter, but firm. A voice that said, "That fear isn't truth, it's just a thought." That day, when the teacher paused after asking a difficult question, Nikhil's hand twitched. He didn't raise it, but he didn't hide either. He looked directly at the teacher, a small act, invisible to others, but to him it was massive. He started noticing how often his mind created stories about failure, about judgment, about what others might be thinking. He realized these stories weren't facts, they were guesses, usually wrong ones. So he made a new habit. Each time he caught himself in a spiral of overthinking, he'd pause and ask, "Is this thought helping me or holding me back?" And most of the time, he already knew the answer. A week later, Nikhil found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He started talking to himself. Not in a loud, obvious way, but in the quiet corners of his mind where the real conversations happen. When fear crept in, he whispered, "I hear you, but I'm not obeying you." When doubt tried to take the wheel, he said, "You're not in charge today." And when he caught himself shrinking again, avoiding again, hesitating again, he didn't scold himself. He simply reminded himself, thoughts are not facts. One day, sitting in the bookstore during a quiet hour, he picked up the same book where he had first seen that line. He turned to a blank page at the end, pulled out a pen, and wrote, "Every day, I win one small battle against my mind, and that is how I will win the war." If you've ever felt like your own thoughts are the heaviest weight you carry, if you've ever been trapped by stories your mind keeps replaying, stories that say you're not good enough, not ready, not capable, know this, you're not alone. This channel was built for moments like this, for people like us, people who are learning not to silence the mind, but to train it, to talk back, to push through, to take one more step. If this story resonated with you, take a quiet step and subscribe, not to follow hype, but to stay close to stories that help you fight back, gently but powerfully, because your mind may be your enemy today, but with the right tools, it can become your greatest strength. Over the next few weeks, Nikhil began to build a quiet routine. Every morning before the noise of the world poured in, he spent 10 minutes with his thoughts, not scrolling, not reacting, just observing. Sometimes he wrote them down, sometimes he challenged them directly, other times he just let them pass, like clouds across a wide sky. He was learning the art of detachment. The voice of fear didn't disappear, doubt still visited, But now, they had less control, because Nikhil had built a second voice, calmer, clearer, grounded in truth, and with each day, that voice grew stronger. He started doing small things he used to avoid, sharing an idea in class, speaking up during a group discussion, applying for an internship he once thought was out of reach. He didn't do these things perfectly. He stumbled, stuttered, second-guessed himself, but he acted anyway. His classmates began to notice a change, not loud, not sudden, just a steadiness in his presence, a sense that Nikhil wasn't shrinking anymore. One of them asked him, "How did you become more confident?" He thought for a moment, then said, "I stopped believing everything I think." That night, back at the bookstore, he returned to the same book, the one that started it all. And this time, he didn't just read. He closed his eyes, placed his hand on the cover, and whispered to himself, "My mind is no longer a battleground. It's becoming my home." One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the town in shades of orange and gold, Nikhil sat quietly at his desk. His notebook lay open, pages filled with reflections, affirmations, and truths he had once been afraid to even think. He flipped through them slowly. "I am not my thoughts. My fear does not get the final say. I can do hard things, even when my mind tells me I can't." Each sentence was a scar turned into strength, a small victory in an invisible war. He remembered how just months ago, even the idea of raising his voice, sharing his ideas, or facing criticism would paralyze him. Now he wasn't just showing up, he was starting to enjoy it, to embrace the challenge. At school, his teachers noticed. He didn't speak often, but when he did, it was with clarity. His classmates began asking for his input. He joined a debate club, not to win, but to learn to stand his ground, to hear the fear and act anyway. And perhaps most surprising of all, the thoughts still came. The anxious ones, the critical ones, but now, they didn't control him. He met them with awareness, with patience, with practice. His mind had become less of a trap and more of a tool. It didn't happen through one breakthrough, it happened through quiet resistance, through repetition, through showing up. And now, Nikhil understood something he wished he had known all along. You don't win the battle in your mind by being fearless. You win it by being brave, despite the fear. One quiet morning, Nikhil stood by the window of the bookstore watching people pass by. Some hurried, heads down, others lost in thought, headphones in, unaware of the world. For a moment, he saw his younger self in them, all that doubt, hesitation, the noise of a mind constantly questioning its own worth. But now, he was different, not because the noise was gone, but because he had learned how to hear it without obeying it. His greatest growth didn't come from some grand achievement. It came from learning how to live with his own mind, how to gently separate himself from the voice that said, "You can't," and respond with a quiet, steady, "I will try anyway." He had learned that confidence isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to keep walking even when fear is loud. As he closed his notebook that morning, he smiled, not because he had won the war, but because he had learned how to keep showing up for the fight. And now, as this story ends, one final question remains. If your mind tried to stop you today, what would happen if, just this once, you didn't listen?